All right, the right partners. So welcome everyone. Tiffany Smith, hi. You will notice a really yummy sandwich, so I apologize if you haven't eaten dinner yet. This metaphor really came to mind, peanut butter and jelly. Again, I have a 3-year-old, so we deal with a lot of peanut butter and jelly in my house. But it was really about the amazing nature of peanut butter and jelly and how, who really wants to eat just a peanut butter sandwich or a jelly sandwich? They're okay together. They're okay apart, but together they're amazing. So to me, that is writing and design, writers, designers. So very quickly, a little bit about me, because who cares about me? These are some of the places I've lived, some of the many, many brands I've worked with. Stalk me on LinkedIn. If anyone has any specific questions, feel free to let me know. I worked for magazines, so I was a journalist very early on. I worked in-house for companies. I've worked for universities. Most recently, I was at H&R Block, so heading up the UX writing content team, content strategy team. We went by many different names. And then, as Tom mentioned, as of Monday, I'm now working at a startup in California called Acasa that's doing some really cool things with AI, machine learning, and healthcare. Again, any questions? We can chat. So I came into UX, fairly late. I really was more focused on content throughout my career. So coming into the UX world was really interesting because it was taking a lot of the things I've learned throughout my career and just applying it in new and fun ways. So really thinking about how to understand the user experience, how to understand how people work, how people interact with things. Those are things I've been doing in my entire career. And it was just switching gears to say like, hey, like, how can we apply this and think about this in new ways through product content, all the different experiences. But less about me. What I would love if everyone can do, can I see the chat? I think somewhere. Can everyone type in one thing into the chat? What's one thing you would really want to get out of this presentation? Because that'll really help me. Either I'll incorporate it throughout or I will, we can do it in the Q&A after. Because I really want to keep this super, super casual. Just have a conversation, interject at any time. If content, if anything, should be fun. So if you have any questions along the way, I'm going to try to keep this super simple so that we have more time for conversation at the end. Because as everyone knows in a presentation, it's always the Q&A that's the best part. So let's get to that. Okay. So first of all, what is content? Again, words person. I like to make sure that we are all using the same words in the same ways. So no matter who I'm speaking to, if I'm giving a presentation in a company, if I'm having conversations, that question comes up more often than not, because everyone has different ideas about what content is, how you're using it. So really starting at kind of that baseline is really, really important. And that's going to come into play throughout this whole conversation about UX writing. So what is content? Here is the standard quote. What is, enter topic here. This is one from Heidi Cohen, who's a really cool marketer. She's been around for years and years and years. So again, I hate people who read quotes, so I'm not going to do that, but just really focusing on the idea, it's about being useful. It's conveying a story and being contextually relevant. And also it's about what people get out of it. It's soliciting an emotion or an engagement. So what is content? All right, $1 million question. Content is PR communications. Content B, content marketing, content strategy, editorial, technical writing, microcopy, that's a fun one, UX writing, conversation design, or also known as chatbots, videos, podcasts, infographics, social media, website content, marketing, case studies, images, all the words, all the places. So this is also really challenging. When we talk about UX writing, when we talk about content can mean so very many different things. So when people are using that, throwing that word around, it's really being, careful about what people are talking about, how we're using it, and how it interacts. So who handles content? So here are some of the very, very many jobs. So unlike, in the design world, you'll often see UX designer, UI designer, graphic designer going old school. Those are, for the majority, those are like a lot of the bulk of it. With content, we apparently like words because we have a lot of words to describe a lot of the same ideas. And these have morphed over the years. It would be really nice if we were all just writers. Very simple. We handle words, we write. But then you really get into ideas like copywriting versus marketing writing. Those are very, very different things. Content strategy, content marketers. Digital content specialists, content ninja. I've made a point of never working for a company that has ninja in their title because that just irks me. Communication specialists, again, chatbot, conversation writer, technical writing. So these are all some of the words that you will see to use to describe. And some of them, there's a lot of nuances here. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. It's really just about how to handle words, what company, what part of the company owns it. Content is very political. In my career, I've been in pretty much every part of an org, from PR, marketing, SEO. No one ever knows where to put content, so it goes into many different places. And people are very, very emotional about who owns the content. So much like with design and UX, content can get a little political at times. And there's different nuances to what type of content you're doing. A lot of the things that we'll be talking about today, and that will be of most interest to this particular group with UX, is really going to be about UX writing, content writing sometimes. The early stages of this career, probably early 2000s, maybe about 2009, when it started to become a thing. There were a lot of writers coming out of the UK who were really focusing on this type of product content. A lot of the early adapters, you have companies like Shopify was one of the big ones. I know they've got a really great design shop there, but now it is everywhere. Again, I just went through, obviously looking at hiring, looking at jobs. There are a disgusting number of jobs for content writers. It used to be people didn't really know what to do with it. Now they are starting to understand, and there's a real need for great writers out there. And whether that's content marketing, so that's doing more outward facing stuff, content. So maybe long form articles, things that are going to really look at organic traffic, trying to pull people in. A lot of the things we're going to be talking about today are really focused on UX writing, sometimes called product content. So the stuff that we deal with within the UX world. So one thing I'd like to focus on also, the new kid in town, content designer. When I was looking around for jobs, this is one thing I looked at. All of the new and cool brands, the brands that are really a little bit more mature in their UX career, are going to be posting for content designers. Facebook announced a few months ago they're doing content designers. A lot of the brands coming out of Silicon Valley, California, everyone's really moving to content design. So whereas, in the past, you saw a lot of technical writers, technical editors. When I started H&R Block, that's the team I inherited. They were technical writers, technical editors who had just been doing different parts of content, handling things very in the weeds for a long period of time. What happened was, we really took a hard look at the type of content that we did and decided, all right, we really weren't ready for content design. I think the design people started to get a little twitchy that we started to tack design on there. So we moved from technical writers to content writers. And then that, I think, really is where the next phase is going to be going. So content designer, what the hell is that? It's really no different. But the idea is writers aren't just writing words. They're much like with what designers do, they're designing experiences through words. So that, we have our British friends to thank for it. There's a few really great people coming out of England, because as we know, all great things come from England. I think her name is Sarah Richards. I'll have to check that. But she really pioneered this idea of content design, and it caught on like wildfire. So now it's come over to the other side of the pool, and they are doing some really amazing things with this type of terminology. Okay, so getting back into our topic, really, what is UX writing? UX writing, words on screens. That's how, when I was at Block, people never really understood what my team did. So when I was talking to them, I explained, all right, as opposed to the marketing content team or the PR content team or the SEO team, UX writing is really focused on product content or the words on screens. And that seemed to help clarify it for them a little bit. But it's also so much more. So here's a really great quote from a content writer, now designer over at Dropbox. I will read this one because I think it's just so evocative. If an actor does something that seems out of character, your audience will immediately notice, and it breaks the scene. It's the same way with writing. If your user suddenly reads a line of text that sounds unlike anything else in your product, it breaks the experience and makes your user start doubting you. To me, this really solidifies why you need good UX writing, why it's important. Having that voice and tone throughout your entire experience, whether it's on a billboard, whether it's in marketing copy, or whether it's down in the depths of like an error message, making sure it all has a similar feel. There's a big difference between voice and tone. Voice is something that should carry with your brand no matter what, whereas tone is always going to be dialed up, dialed down, changed a little bit. Your voice should always sound consistent when your tone may need to change based on the area. But if you don't have that consistent voice throughout your experience, it's just going to sound really awful. So I wanted to start getting into some of the nuances of what we mean by product content, UX writing. It's always interesting as an industry, we're getting more advanced, but there are a lot of words to describe a lot of things. So if anyone has any questions along the way, I don't think I can actually see the chat, but the question thing. So if anyone has any questions, just interject at any point. So these are some of the nuances that I wish I came up with, but I have to give credit to Christina Halverson, who is amazing. If you don't follow her on Twitter or all the your social media area of preference, you certainly should. She founded a really amazing group of people called Confab. It's a giant content conference that just took place actually last week. And really just getting together some amazing people within the content strategy world. So there's almost a three-part process when you want to think about the idea of product content or UX writing. So product content strategy is like big picture umbrella thinking. That's what someone, in my role really might be doing a lot of. It's thinking about that voice and tone. It's thinking about how what we're writing is going to be connected to all the different areas of the business. Product content strategy is meetings. Then you start to get into some of the content design. Content design is thinking more about the functionality. How is everything going to work together? Let's think about the experience. How are the words going to interact with each other? Let's talk to stakeholders. Let's make sure this thing works. And then UX writing at its fundamental are the actual words. It's when you're starting to actually, use the equivalent to get down into like the fonts and the design and the aspect ratio and all that. It's putting the words on page. So when people use the word, the phrase UX writing, that is almost at the very bare bones of what it is. But as I said before, UX writing, content strategy is just so much more. And I like to think of it as layers of an onion. Your center is going to be the UX writing. That's how that's where a lot of people really start out, either as a content writer, UX writer, really knowing how to write, what words go together, what words matter, how to include different nuances. But then you also, as you increase in your career, as you expand, you really need to start understanding more beyond just the words. So what are those extra layers? Okay, yeah, these words work, but what about in the next screen, or what about in another product? How are things all starting to be connected? And that's where you start to get into that multi-layer idea. All right, and the fun part, what do UX writers actually do all day? Aside from, we're just reading books and we're, drinking tea and eating chocolate, all that happens too. But I love this screen. So this is from a brilliant woman named Rachel McConnell, again, over in England. She's a content design manager at BT, but she's been around for a while. And, this type of chart, might be very familiar, hopefully, to some of the designers. It looks like something that would have come out of Nielsen Norman, but this is, Jason, this is very similar to some of the stuff that has been working on. But it's really about, looking at the buckets. What are the areas? We're empathizing. And that sounds familiar. Defining, ideating, designing and prototyping, reviewing, implementing, testing, and learning. All things that are actually very intrinsic to the design experience that should be baked into bare bones any UX. If a UX team isn't following these larger buckets, there's a problem. And much like the designers are going to have their own versions of this, these, in the yellow and green boxes, those are some of the things that the writers are going to be doing. We are thinking about our clients. What are we empathizing on? Are we understanding our current user behavior? Are we having, client journey maps, product strategy? What are we defining? What are we really trying to understand? Ideating, giving all the different words for all the different things. I tell my writers that your first draft is probably going to be god awful. Second draft too. Third, good chance. Maybe by the sixth or seventh, you're finally starting to nail it. Designing and prototyping, reviewing. So this chart I really enjoy. So feel free to screen share, to screen grab. It's just a nice way of just showing that there's a lot. UX writing isn't just like, all right, we're going to write a few words on a page, print, done. Here's one CTA, that's it. There's, if you're doing UX writing, if you're doing content design, if you're doing content strategy, right, it should be very thoughtful. And we want to learn from the experience. We want to learn what's, how to make things better. Any questions about any of this? Okay, keep going. All right, so my fun part. All right, so again, magazine background. So I love my listicles. You always need a good listicle. So to start us off, 7 tips for working with a UX writing team. And again, I like to keep screens, slides as fairly minimal as possible. So we're going to just chat about some of these. So first one, it's not content first, it's collaboration always. So you get, you hear the phrase, oh, we have a content first, system set up in place. And that sounds great, except for the fact when you're just saying, okay, you guys go write in a vacuum, then come back, give it to us, and then we'll design, and then maybe we'll hand it off to product. Yet that handoff does not work. So going back to that peanut butter and jelly metaphor, it's really about how things work together. So how to work with a UX writing team. Number 1, early, often, always. So if you really want to succeed, and Jason is a great example of this because we've worked together on these types of projects, is the second you start talking about a project, you need to be bringing the writers in. It's not like, all right, the designers and the product folks are going to go ideate, and then we'll loop the content people in, they can write their words, and then we'll go back to it. True content shouldn't be a ticket. It should really be part of the process early on. And I think as UX writing starts to become more established here in Kansas City and in other organizations as well, that's really where you're seeing success. It's having the writers in during those strategy conversations when we can have the same time to be thoughtful, to be nuanced, to think about the types of words, the type of experiences that we're going to use. And then it's not just, handing it off. It's content needs to be in play every step of the way. I tell my writers, think about writing and design as a true partnership. They need to be collaborating every step of the way and really playing ideas back and forth. The designers shouldn't be just going off on their island. Content shouldn't be on their island. We all need to be having some fun together. Okay, number 2, don't start with Figma. So this is something that I would talk to my writers about all the time too, in the fact that it's really easy just to jump in design. Whether it's detailed design, whether it's gray screens, whatever, it's easy to try to tackle a problem, to try to jump into designing screens. One of the things that I was doing was really saying, don't do that. Before you jump into Figma, jump into Miro, jump onto a whiteboard, jump onto a freaking Post-it. I don't care. Don't start jumping into design yet, because what happens? You get too far along and you realize maybe you're answering the wrong problem. What you really, if you're collaborating in a true way, before you start planning out your screens, you need to figure out what they're trying to solve for. I can't tell you how many writers would come to me saying like, I'm having such a hard time with this particular screen. And it would always be because they were asking that one little screen, poor little screen, to do way too much. It was trying to solve for like 4 or 5 different things when it should really be 1 or 2. So how do you solve for that? You back up and you just do some basic outlining. All right, what are we trying to answer here? What are we trying to solve for? We don't need 5 headers. We don't need all this content on the screen. I'd like to tell people, like, for a content person, I like really clean things. I don't like to have a lot of words. It confuses things. I want to have the right words. And if you have a header, a subheader, this like list, a CTA, a text link below that, there's too much going on. Whereas, maybe instead of having one really chaotic screen, maybe you're breaking it up to 2 or 3. There was one designer we used to work with. He was working with a writer, and at the end of the sprint, they brought in this really amazing chart. I'll see if Jason can figure out who I'm talking about. I'll ask him later. They brought in this great chart, and it was the best chart that has ever been created in the history of UX. It was a very nice chart. But the problem was the chart didn't solve what it needed. It was comparing different products, but the products shouldn't have been compared. It wasn't the right way to tell the story. So no matter how nice the design was, the words were great, but it wasn't telling the story that they needed. And why? Because they jumped into designs way too quickly. And so when you're, and these are some tips that, apply whether you're a writer or a designer. It's really about figuring out how you want to tell that story. at the heart of it, I consider myself a storyteller, whether it's UX writing, content marketing, whatever. It's about telling stories. And that's something that has really followed me throughout my career, whether it's a magazine, whether higher ed. It's all about how to tell stories. And that philosophy kind of has held true throughout for quite a while for me. And that's part of UX also, even if it's just one singular screen, what is that trying to solve? And then figuring out what that story is throughout the entire product flow. So going back to rule number 2, don't start with Figma, back up, have conversations, figuring out what the story is you're going to tell before you start writing a word, before you start designing. I mean, honestly, in true UX writing, content design, you should only be actually writing maybe, 30, 40% of your time, which is really scary. People think like, oh, I'm just going to be doing nothing but writing. It's the storytelling. It's figuring out what you need to say and then how you say it.
And Tiffany, to that, one of the questions we had in the chat was, how do you test the success of UX writing and content, right? And much like we do usability testing for UX and looking at it from the lens of, qualitative and quantitative analysis, right? So can you speak a little bit to that testing that kind of goes through that process? So you've done all this ideation, you've kind of gone through that. What does that testing look like from?
I'm gonna make a note for that. I think that'll come up in one of the other tips, but I want to talk about just testing in general because it is
awesome. Absolutely.
All right. So I think I may have messed up here. I'm going from 2 to 4, so ignore number 3. Number 4, show the mess. This is something I tell all my writers, all the designers. Sometimes people are very careful they just want to show the best of the best. They want to show all the stuff that looks pretty, all the stuff that's perfect. Absolutely not. You want to show the yucky stuff. You want to show the mess. You want to show, here's all of my ideations. I just don't want to see that one perfect screen with like, here's all the content that I love. I want to see like the 15 screens you did before that, the 15 H1s where you really started to ideate and how it came up. Because, maybe you like this one, but maybe number 16 was a little bit better, or maybe that's going to, spark some ideas with other people. So what we started to do as a team is really start to look at some of those ideations and hold on to those, because maybe also if something wasn't right for one place, maybe it's right for another. So this would be something I would talk about with the designers all the time, because they would sometimes be almost afraid to show their designs. And again, Jason knows who I'm talking about. Really, afraid to show designs, or like wanting to make everything perfect and then hand it off to a writer. Again, if you're going to be that peanut butter and jelly, that's not how you need to work. You really need to get into the mess with each other and say like, here's my work in progress. At Block, we actually transitioned to Figma. God, was it last fall? And before that, we were in InVision and Sketch and all the other typical tools. And honestly, we have grown light years as a UX organization, being able to move so much faster, being able to share our stuff, ideate better, just really work in collaboration. So a lot of it is having the right tools as well. Oh, there's number 3. It was hiding. So banish lorem ipsum. Now, I love Latin. I took like 5 years of Latin, high school, college, all that. I hate lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum to me is basically a mark of we failed. So I know it's, I don't know if it's taught in design school or whatever. I want you to delete it. Like set something up in your computer that you can't put lorem ipsum in. It'll start like flashing and blow up at you. Why? Because as I said, it is basically a failure. So Jason, you were talking about testing. I've seen in a lot of works where people, they're going to test with lorem ipsum, like, oh, we didn't have time to get to content. We just want to design it. We want to design the experience and put it out and see what it looks like. Well, without the writing, people aren't going to know what the hell you're talking about. So really trying to be true to what we're looking at, trying to put the words in, trying to, it's as if we tried to test something. Imagine trying to test the words, trying to test a headline without seeing the design or seeing the product or seeing the flow. Yeah, you can test the words, but it's not going to be an entire experience. So you're always going to get something a little bit less. Flip through style guides. Now, as Jason knows, style guides are very important. They are basically a content team's version of a design system. So really trying to give details about what the voice is, what the tone is, what words we use. Depending on the organization, they can be very simple or they can be much more mature. MailChimp has one of the best ones out there. They really launched a lot of it, but there's some great ones out there. If anyone is particularly interested in style guides, I recently redid the one for Block. So that is very, very passionate to me. So if you want to talk more about style guides, definitely let me know. We can have a whole session just on style guides. But as you know, as writers are becoming more and more familiar with, the design world and what, when you guys are talking about colors and fonts and ratios and iconography and how you guys do what we do, style guide is going to, as you start to play around with that, that's going to show that same type of education and that passion and understanding what your partners in content are doing as well. Invite writers to presentations. So this is kind of a pet peeve for me. A lot of the times, you'll have writers and designers working hand in hand. But then when it comes to presenting it to product, when it comes to presenting it even to the C-suite, oftentimes, sometimes writers, the designers involved, writers, not always. That happened a lot of Block. So really, again, going back to how to work well with a content team, really trying to make sure that you are truly pairing up design and content. And then also when it comes to presentations, when it comes to brainstorming, when it comes to showing things off, having a writer in the room can actually be incredibly valuable because they will pick up on nuances of conversations. Or if you have a VP who's calling out, why do we use this tone? Why do we use this words? Happens all the time. You can have a writer there to say a little bit more about why and what that thought process is. If you are working with a really amazing UX writing team, you'll be able to make those data-driven information, have those great conversations. That was one of the things at Block I really try to emphasize with the content team. I try to make them very data-driven. We're not just choosing a word because we like it. We're choosing a word because we're testing it, because we're learning more about it, because it works. These aren't just things that we're pulling out of the ether. And the last one, let's right-size some ratios. So, Sorry Nielsen Norman Group, their current suggestion for ratios, and again, we're all trying to grow UX organizations. It sounds like we're going to learn more about that next month with friends at Cerner. So how to go from, was it 50 to 250? But as we start to look at what writers to designers, one of the current philosophies is we should have half a writer per designer. To which I always respond, well, so we only have to go to half the meetings or do half the projects? It doesn't always work that way. So really trying to figure out in your organization, as we talked about, if as we're trying to mature and become, better spokespeople for UX, calling out when writers need to be a part of it and what, how projects will be better when we can work together properly. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is how to test. That's actually something that's really interesting to me. I have started taking a class on content testing and research. It's something that organizations definitely need to be more mature about. So, much like with design, there's so many different ways that you can test. There's a lot of A/B testing. There's a lot of things you can look at. You can test a word, a phrase. You can just test the content as part of a design. So going back to about this time last year, maybe over in the summer, again, working for a tax company, we had to quickly figure out what the tax process was going to look like. H&R Block, really based their business model on being in person. Well, 2020 came and in person didn't always work so well. So we really had to quickly stand up and expand our virtual tax prep experience. So when asked about testing, that was one of the things we went back and forth around for probably months. What the heck are we going to call our virtual tax business? There had been testing done in the past showing that people didn't really understand the word virtual. So we had a lot of heads saying, well, we can't call it virtual. People don't understand what word virtual is. And again, this is, probably last, July. I'm like, yeah, pandemic's kind of fixed that. Everyone unfortunately knows what virtual is these days, but that was a lot of fights we had to say. People were like, well, maybe we should call it remote. Maybe we should just brand it. Everyone likes to brand things. Give them kooky names. So what do? We stood our ground and we tested it. And lo and behold, the majority of people understood what the term virtual meant. And then, when we wrote out like, all right, here are the steps to this process. What would you call this? Everyone was like, oh yeah, virtual tax prep. So a lot of even digging into a single word is incredibly valuable. Another great example. I forget what the product was for. This is probably about 1.5 years ago. But there was a screen that we wanted to increase take rates for a specific product to block. And the challenge was we didn't really have any dev resources. Sound familiar? We really didn't have any design resources. This is something that we just need to do a very quick hit on. Now, this is basically a little bit of what not to do. You don't want to rely on UX writing just to solve some quick problems, solve things because we don't have other resources. But sometimes it happens. We all know that. So what do? Even just on one screen, we just changed the words around, changing the header, changing there's some bullets. We were able to increase take rate for that particular product by like 40%, just from making things clear, just from making things a little more consistent. So it really does show the ROI, the power of words. I mean, I am all about testing. I will test all day, any day. I think a true UX team really needs to have researchers embedded. If you're going to build something from scratch, having writers, having designers, having researchers, and having those conversations on a regular basis is just incredibly crucial. The more we can look at testing, bake it into the process. Again, it would be lovely to test every single screen, and hopefully you should, but really trying to pinpoint what are the things that can have the most dramatic impact. Again, one of the things we did at Block is we were still in the early days when I left of testing and doing some research, but starting to be more careful about what the different types of words that we were testing and really creating a word bank. All right, so what do you do if you don't have access to a writer? Just give up, just jump. Yeah. Again, ideally, if you are working at a more mature organization, hopefully writers should be baked into the staff. If they're not, come talk to me. We will help. There are a lot of writers out there, and I think a lot of organizations are really starting to be more mature and realize that they need some writing help. Whether it's someone on staff, there's freelancers, there's a lot of different resources out there. But what if you are a designer who is by themselves? There's some really great resources out there that can still help. So these are some, I'm going to go pretty quickly through these next few slides. So feel free to screen grab, or I can put some in the chat. Conferences and classes, Confab, Button. Confab is a much broader content strategy one. Button is actually a fairly new conference. They just had the first one last September, and it is solely for product content. So it's a really amazing group of people who strictly focus on product content, UX writing. So check out their website. They're fantastic. Want to take a class? UX Writers Collective has some really amazing fundamental classes, some larger ones, some more niche ones. Same thing with conversation design. If you're interested in chatbots, which is also known as conversation design, Conversation Design Institute has some excellent resources. Groups, if you have at all interested in UX writing, and if you're just going to do one thing after this conversations, go to check out contentandux.org. They've got an incredible Slack channel. Some of the best minds in the business are all having great conversations there about what to do, about how to speak about inclusivity, what words to be using, how to think about how to deal with a lot of organizational challenges. So go ahead there. San Francisco meetup. There's some really great Facebook groups as well. Tools. All right. So if you're interested in being a better writer, learning more about UX, here's just some of the simple things that you can do. Pulling out a thesaurus. It's simple. Related words is I like to call a thesaurus on steroids. Grammar Girl has been around for years. If you want to know what an Oxford comma is, go there. Grammarly, get the Grammarly plugin for Chrome preferably. Use the paid version, it's a lot better. Self-define.app it's still very early stages, but it's a really nice kind of group think about using words that focus more on inclusivity, accessibility. It's a very important concept to me. When I did the style guide over at H&R Block, that was something we really, really tried to focus on. There are even thinking about something as simple as pronouns. When you're talking about UX writing, there are so many different nuances. And in order to be kind of a better person and have better products, you really need, UX writers really need to be up on all the latest nuances with those. If you want to do a fun activity and really think about what UX writing can be, Google microcopy Canvas. There's a PDF, there's an article, and then there's a PDF out there. That's just a really fun tool. For Figma, here are some of my favorite content-related plugins. Ditto is one of the cooler ones out there. so many articles. Just go to Medium, type in UX writing, you will find like 5 billion articles. And here are some of my favorite books. Content design. Yeah, Sarah Richards. So she's the amazing woman who worked for the UK government actually, and got a lot of this content design stuff started. So that's one of the earlier ones. Writing is designing. Honestly, if you're going to get one book to learn more about it, that should probably be it. It came out maybe a year ago. I actually bought copies for all of my team because I was so impressed with it. It gives some very realistic, very pinpointed advice for how to do UX writing and how to do it well. And the other ones, of course, are as good as well. So, before this talk, the team asked me to talk about some of the brands I like. All right. There's so many. There's some amazing brands out there that are doing UX writing content very well. And again, join that Slack group I mentioned. They're always sharing ideas here. Divi, Drizzly is one that just is really irreverent and fun. Upper right-hand corner, you see Book of the Month. Yes, that is the Book of the Month Club that's been around for like 5,000 years. Check out their website. They have rebranded. They actually have some amazing content. So those are just some of few of my favorites. And that brings us to the end. Danke. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. Hello again.
Hey,
right.
Great. That was thanks for joining us, Tiffany.
Yeah.
No, this was awesome. I appreciate it, and hope everybody on the call at least took a couple of nuggets from that. Super great stuff. I kind of wanted to roll into some of the questions that we had in our chat here, just to kind of follow up with this. And if there's anybody else on the call that has any more questions, feel free to get those in, and we can get those answered. But to kind of kick off, one of the things that kind of looked at was voice and tone. This kind of goes with that style guide, but one of the questions that was out there is, how do you determine the voice and tone of the brand? So you kind of hit a little bit of that, and then there will be another one that kind of follows along with that. But what are the links and names to style guide creating? So there's kind of this mismatch, or this matchup of that style guide, voice and tone for the brand, but also kind of what is that structure of the style guide. So
what was the second one, Jason? It was how you organize it.
What are the links, names to a style guide creating? So I would think that
gotcha.
It does have some of that structure to similar to a design system, naming, things like that.
So first of all, style guides. Like I mentioned, I've been living, breathing style guides for the last few months. They are fun, and every organization does them differently. It's really about what your brand needs. Who owns it also? Sometimes it'll live within a content team. Sometimes it'll live within marketing. They could be many different things. A lot of the times big organizations will work with this like giant brand marketing company, and they'll come back with something that includes like all the logos, all the colors, here's our overall brand voice, and then that's about it. What we really needed at Block is almost that secondary layer, the stuff that gets into not just the overarching voice and tone, but the nuances. What words are we going to use? How are we going to use them? How is everything going to interconnect? So those are what some of the really good style guides are going to showcase. And hold on, I'm going to pull up. Here we go, style guides. Okay, so looking at some of the guys, I'll put this in the chat. But MailChimp, like I said, was one of the ones that got it started. So if you want to take a look at that one, that's one of my favorites out there. And there are just so many different, really interesting ones available. Let me see if this link works. No, that link does not work.
Yeah, and you're on the same track as I was listening to your talk here. I kind of had a Shopify's Polaris pulled up from the content section
Polaris
as well.
I mean,
so great ways that you can kind of look to these companies to kind of identify what are those key themes or areas within that style guide that need to be brought to life.
Honestly, when I started style guide, I started with a table of contents more than anything, trying to figure out what are the elements, what are the things that we need to have in there. Yes, voice and tone. What are the things like how we talk about happy things like, hey, you're getting a refund. How do we talk about sad things like, oh, you owe the IRS money. What are the things, I actually had someone on my team, Sarah, who's absolutely amazing, go off and do almost like a side style guide, just focus on inclusivity, accessibility. And that is going to be so incredibly helpful because it's something that everyone just needs to just be aware of, and we need to bake into everything that we do. I mean, it could be There's also typically parts of style guide, in addition to the voice and tone, there are the sections about what I like to call A to Z. It's every single word, all the different nuances. Oh, that's a good one. Hold on, let me find that for you. Where is, I've got, there we go. Here is one of the gold standards. And there we go. This is one that I mentioned Sarah Richards came up with. If you want to talk A to Z, this is the UK government's digital service style guide. So this really got a lot of the content design stuff kicked off. There's pretty much anything and everything in here that they're really going to need. So what I like about this one, it's all research based. They just didn't put what they thought. They did a ton and years of research to pull all this together. And now you have an amazing, mature document that is, making the UK government going, much more versatile.
Awesome. Thank you for those resources. Yeah. Just kind of go into some of those key companies like MailChimp, Shopify, kind of look into those resources. But yeah, thanks for putting that. And I'm sure a lot of people are becoming a fan of Sarah Richards off of this call, or at least going to dig a little bit deeper and kind of learn a little bit more. Couple of things that kind of have come in specifically, when you were going over the slide of, Figma, Grammarly, people were loving that. But, just kind of into the mindset of like, how do you determine what words to use? Do you have the framework when and where to use what kind of punctuation, grammar, and then, kind of blending that. So,
well, here's the thing.
What are your thoughts, sir?
Something like punctuation, I was a New York City public school kid. I didn't learn, actual good grammar until I went to high school and took Latin. I learned my grammar through Latin. So really, when it comes to grammar, as long as it's consistent, that's why you have a style guide, for consistency. Are you going to line on Oxford commas so that, comma before the and when you have a list? Really just picking what you want to do and just being consistent. That's the biggest thing that a style guide or that a UX writing team is going to give you. Then it's really just about figuring out how you want to approach words. I like having word banks. So figuring out what words are going to feel intrinsic to your brand, what words are going to feel right, what words are not going to feel right. Maybe if you're like a fun, cool, hip brand, you're not going to use words like heretofore that legal teams always try to sneak in there. So really trying to understand what the voice is. Again, that if you Google that site I mentioned, those are just some fun exercises that you can do. How did I come out with the style guide? I did probably 80% of the work myself. And then I worked with an amazing agency called The Writer. They're based in New York and also in London. And they helped me just do some gut checking for what is the voice? How can we really jump into expertise, authenticity, really trying to make things super, super clear. So it's also making sure that you think you're using the right words. Test the heck out of it. Ask the people that you're going to be working with. Ask your clients which words feel right. There are lots of different great resources. And I know a few people were interested in that research and testing. Check out the UX Writers Collective. They actually have a really amazing class just focused on research and testing. So I highly recommend that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Just a couple more. I think we're getting to the top of the hour here, but in the latter of some of these questions coming up, it's really talking about accessibility. How do you help people with disabilities through UX writing? And then another question kind of piggyback off of that, which is how do you handle and consider working with screen readers? So just a little bit of your thoughts on that.
I mean, that's going to come back to the collaboration with designers. You can't do the UX writing with considering these types of things in a vacuum. You have to work with the designers, work with the product folks, really trying to look and understand how different people with all different needs are going to interact with your products across all the many different ways, whether it's desktop, phone, the 50 million versions of the phone. I mean, it's little things like using UX best practices where for, like a username or password input, you put it above the box. It's little tricks like that. It's little things about not talking about, look at the text below. Well, it might not be below for someone who's on a screen reader. Don't look at things like left and right. So it's really being purposeful about those words that side style guide that I mentioned about inclusivity, accessibility, those are the things we are focusing on. It's really trying to understand and be consistent and trying to just be better. There's a lot of great resources out there about how people can start to bring these accessibilities into play. And I feel like the UX world is becoming so much more mature with this and really starting to put these ideas first as it becomes more open. And we're having so many great conversations about the importance of this.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to lean a little bit into that as well with design. And, with Headspace, if you go to headspace.com, they've really done a great job. I had to look at the tool that they're powered by, but, just the way that they're exploring their accessibility, and actually, you have navigation. So that specific comment for screen readers, this might be a good one to just kind of look into with how they kind of included that as well. So making their site compatible for that. So they're using this tool called Equal Web, which is awesome. So feel free to explore that. I mean, that might just take it to not only looking at the words, but also how do we, kind of put that into the experience within the actual web page. So.
And then I'm looking here. So Wyatt, you're looking for tips to improve your interactions with the design team. I mean, honestly, we're all trying to do the same thing. Everyone wants to create cool experiences. There's some amazing designers on this call. It's really just about partnering. And, some colleagues are better than others. You can say that for any industry. It's really about being upfront with what you need and what you want to get out of it. And stressing, like, I want to help you do your job better. We need to talk. We need to have a daily stand-up in the morning where we talk about what the status of our projects are, what we're doing, and really trying to be true partners. It's not a content team and a design team. It's a UX team. So really trying to work together for everything. And all the designers I've had the pleasure of working with have been so passionate. If you go into UX, you are really passionate about this area. So just trying to do good work and trying to give each other the space to be creative and then come together at the right points. Let's see. What else should I
Absolutely. Let's see if we can wrap up a couple. If you want to go into it, have you ever worked with SEO focused roles?
Oh, yeah.
So that would be one. And then there's one that specifically kind of goes into the agile versus waterfall flow. But if you want to tackle the SEO one, and then we'll see where we're at with that. So
perfect. I love SEO. That was actually my background. I worked for a company called care.com way back when, and it was definitely more focused on content marketing, SEO. They're just it's really interesting. As a writer, I like to consider SEO keys to the kingdom. SEO is basically understanding what your customers are looking for and how they phrase things. Well, that sounds like a lot of some amazing research. So I try to work with the SEO folks on a regular basis. Those are a lot of my go-tos for ideas. Hey, what are you guys writing about? What's the organic traffic? What types of things are you doing? And let me take that research and understand that in my area of the world as well. So SEO, that was one thing when I was hiring. Everyone had to have either an interest, a background, or an understanding of SEO, because that really does make your writing just so much better. Search engine optimization for anyone who is not familiar with that field.
That's right. That's right. No, before we wrap, Tiffany, any last words, thoughts, where people can find you, keep up with you as you kind of move into your new role?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
we'll kind of push out there.
Anyone on this call, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Tiffany is right. WRIT. I'm happy to continue these conversations. I will talk content all day, every day. So I'm happy to, do some one-on-one coaching, whatever anyone needs. I am so incredibly passionate about this field. The more we can make words better, the better for everyone. It really helps experiences. And, whether you have a background in UX, I don't think anyone that I hired on my UX writing team had a UX writing background. So if you've never done it before, that's okay. That's something, I can teach you UX. I can't teach you how to write. So as long as you have that interest, that background, you can do so much. I mean, look at my career. I've done content in pretty much every industry out there. I'm going to find some more and keep going down the road. But, as long as you're a good writer, my philosophy is you can really start to write about anything. It's just understanding the different nuances. And as long as you have that passion, that love for writing, you'll be okay. So it's learning the different nuances. I've seen so many different trends and all this newfangled stuff in my career. There's always going to be something new and different slices of industry, but I've just been so incredibly impressed with all the UX people. This really industry, anyone who does UX writing is just so enjoyable. And it's just a fun field. And then I get to work with the designers and UX writers. So it's cool.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Tiffany, for joining us at UXPA, KC. Thanks for having us. And for anybody who is new for the first time joining our events, thanks. And we look forward to kind of seeing you on the next road into next month. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, Tiffany.
That was so much fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, bye, Jillian and friend.
Bye.